Hello everybody, my name is Emma and today I'd like to read to you a chapter of Little History of Economics. By Niall Kishtainy. Chapter 33. Knowing Me, Knowing You. At a glittering banquet in Stockholm to celebrate his receipt of the Nobel Prize, the American economist George Aloud, born in 1940, explained his economic thinking to the guests, who included the King and Queen of Sweden. Bring a sad old nag to market, put a live eel down her throat, she will be frisky. Sellers of nags, worn-out old horses, use all sorts of tricks to make the horses look lively, though. These can have bad consequences, though. On one side of the market are the tricksters. The other side avoids the tricksters. In the extreme, markets totally collapse. Aloud became famous for a 1970 article, The Market for Lemons, which looked at the modern-day version of the horse buyer's dilemma: how to buy a second-hand car. The car that you're thinking of buying from your local dealer might be a good one. It could, however, be a dud, a lemon, one that looks fine on the garage forecourt but is sure to break down if it's driven more than a few miles down the road. You will never know until you've bought it. The seller knows whether the car is a lemon, but will always tell you that it's in excellent condition. Buyers and sellers will be willing to trade good cars for a high price, bad ones for a low price. Problem is that buyers don't know which cars are good and which are bad. Assume that half are good and half are bad. There's then a 50% chance that the car you're thinking of buying is a lemon. You will be unwilling to pay the high price for it. You'd only be willing to pay a price halfway between the high and low prices. The problem is that the owners of cars won't be willing to sell their cars at the intermediate price, well below the high price, and the cars are worth. So they stop offering the cars for sale. The owners of lemons, on the other hand, are willing to sell. The fact that someone puts their car up for sale shows that it's suspect. Hence, the bad cars drive out the good ones. It's a failure of the market because there are plenty of people willing to pay a high price for a good car. Aklalov's idea is that in the economy, some people know more than others. Perhaps that sounds ridiculously obvious, but when he wrote his article, it wasn't well understood. The standard model of the economy shows that markets worked well. They bring about an outcome in which people's desires were satisfied as they could be with the resources available. We looked at how they do that in chapter 25. This depended on big assumptions, though. Markets had to be competitive and they couldn't suffer from externalities, such as a factory's pollutant imposing costs on a nearby fishery. Economists knew that in practice markets often fell short. Aklav saw that there was another assumption of the standard model that had been overlooked. For markets to work well, people had to know everything: what cars cost, what quality they were, whether an employee was hard-working, how reliable a borrower was. If we're going into business together, you want to know whether I'm competent, and I want to know the same about you. The assumption of perfect information, that people do know everything, was rarely questioned. When Aklav tried to get his article published, journal after journal rejected it. One editor said that the idea was trivial. Another said that if it was true, economics would have to change. Eventually, Akalov's article was published and economics did change. It helped start off the new field of information economics. Economists have had a technical name for the lemons problem, adverse selection, and found it cropping up all over the place. Take health insurance. When you buy health insurance, you pay a company a monthly amount, a premium, and the company promises to pay your medical bills if you get ill. In insurance markets, it's the buyers, the people who want to get insured, who know more than the sellers, the insurance company. A health insurance company would like to charge a high premium to unhealthy people because they're likely to need medical services often, and a low premium to healthy people. However, it's hard for the company to tell who's healthy and who's unhealthy. So, like the buyers of second-hand cars, they move to the middle and charge a medium level of premium to everyone. Just like the owners of good cars, healthy people then don't want to take part in the market. The premium is too high for them, given their low risk of ill health. The only people who want to buy the insurance are the unhealthy people. Hence, the unhealthy drive up the healthy. The insurance company then has to raise its premium sky high to cover the increased costs from having to pay the medical bills of the many unhealthy people who buy health insurance from it. Eventually, only the sickest people are willing to buy the expensive insurance on offer. Adverse selection happens when important characteristics are unknown by buyers or sellers, such as when a buyer doesn't know how good a car is, or a seller of insurance knows little about the health of a potential customer. Markets also get disrupted when people's actions are unknown. Economists call it moral hazard. After you've bought insurance against the loss of your mobile phone, you might get careless with it because you know that you'll get a new one if you leave it on the bus. Insurance companies know this but can't check up on you. As a consequence, they won't want to insure you completely. They might ask you to cover some portion of any loss. Again, it's a failure of the market because you'd like to have full insurance coverage and the firm would like to sell it to you, but a lack of information stops the trade. Buyers and sellers find ways of dealing with some of the glitches. People do manage to buy and sell decent second-hand cars, for example. Buyers try to find out the history of the cars that they're thinking of buying, and sellers of good cars offer guarantees. Another pioneer of information economics, Michael Spence, born in 1943, investigated how people get around lack of information by signaling to each other. For example, firms want to hire the most productive people, but people's ability is hard to observe. One way that people signal their ability is by obtaining educational qualifications. Pushing the idea further, education might not make people that much better at their jobs. Qualifications merely help employers to distinguish between productive and unproductive people. Sometimes, though, there isn't an easy solution to a lack of information. If a bank has no way of telling whether it's giving out loans to responsible business owners or crooks, it might stop giving out loans altogether. As Aloud warns, when information is very poor, markets might seize up completely. They stop supplying the useful things that people and businesses need. While at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in the 1960s, Aloud made friends with a fellow student, a future pioneer of information economics, who'd go on to share the stage with him in Stockholm. Joseph Stiglitz, born in 1943, hailed from Gary in Indiana, an industrial town founded in the early 20th century by the United States Steel Corporation, the giant company created in 1901 by a group of American businessmen, including Andrew Carnegie. The poverty, discrimination, and unemployment that Stiglitz witnessed in Gary influenced his thinking as an economist. Having seen the downside of a market economy, it would be hard to be euphoric about its marvels, he said. Conventional economics, to the extent that it championed free markets above all, was simply wrong. To Stiglitz, information economists is relevant to the biggest questions in economics. For example, how poor countries get richer. In the 1990s, he was able to apply his theories in the real world. He became an advisor to President Bill Clinton and later joined the World Bank in Washington, which provides loans and advice about economic policy to developing countries. Stiglitz wasn't your average government official. He often walked around with a wonky tie and didn't care about offending powerful people. In Washington, Stiglitz took on the established officials and economists in he claimed to the nation that free markets were the answer for poor countries. The World Bank and a similar Washington organization, the International Monetary Fund, had been pressing developing countries to adopt free market policies, including the opening up of their economies to foreign flows of money. They argued that the money would be invested in new factories and roads and to help economic development. Huge amounts of money flowed into the economies of East Asia, but as we saw earlier, in 1997, those countries struck economic rocks. Foreign lenders hadn't worried enough about whether the people they were lending to would be able to repay the loans. They'd made the loans on the basis of poor information, and in the end, many of the borrowers weren't able to repay. Moral hazard made things worse because lenders expected to be rescued by governments if things went wrong, so had no incentive to be careful about who they were lending to. Well-functioning financial markets depend on lenders being able to accurately assess how reliable borrowers are, and on investors understanding the riskiness of the projects they put their money into. Financial markets are all about information, much more so than markets for things like oil or wheat. When financial markets aren't well developed, as in East Asia, they aren't good at sorting out complex information. Stiglitz was scathing about the recommendations of Washington's officials. They completely ignored the risks of free market policies that let money flow in and out of countries without restrictions when the lenders didn't have good information about who they were lending to. He likened the policy to putting a Ferrari engine into an old banger and then setting off without bothering about the state of the tires or the skill of the driver. Information economics is also relevant to the big economic challenges facing advanced economies. Since the Great Depression of the 1930s, economists have been puzzling over what causes unemployment. George Akerlof had been wondering about it since the age of 11 when his father lost his job. He reasoned that when one father lost his job and so stopped spending, another one would be put out of job and so on. The resulting change reaction turning into a downwards economic spiral. Without knowing it, the schoolboy had discovered one of Keynes' main principles of economics. The post-war economics was based on the work of Keynes, said that the wages tend not to fall easily during recessions, and by staying high discouraged firms from taking on more workers. Why didn't they fall? Information economics provided a new answer. An employer can't watch its workers all the time and so doesn't know how hard they're working. To encourage them to work hard, the employer increases the wages it pays. When all employers do the same, the overall wage level increases. At a high wage level, firms hire fewer workers and unemployment rises. The threat of unemployment then encourages the already employed workers to work hard. This way of thinking about unemployment became part of a new interpretation of Keynes, followed by many of today's Keynesian economists. When Akerlof and Stiglitz began their new field of information economics, many economists thought that markets worked pretty well most of the time. They believed in the invisible hand. Adam Smith's idea that buying and selling in markets lead to the best use of society's resources. Breakdowns in the market because of information problems don't necessarily mean that people are buying stupid or irrational. It's perfectly rational for people to stop buying horses because they suspect that they're being offered old nags. But the breakdowns mean that the invisible hand no longer works. On receiving his Nobel Prize, Stiglitz suggested that the reason that the hand is invisible is that it's not there, and if it is, it's paralyzed. That's all for today. Bye.